And so I've given this talk about 100 times, and I think I'm getting it down. But I'm just going to give you a little bit of a background about some of the East Coast industry that I represent. We're up to about $156 million in farm gate value. There's about 1,300 mostly small mom and pop farms on the East Coast, employing directly about 4,000 people and indirectly another 4,000 people. Some of the trends that we're seeing, about 43% of that production is now oysters, and it's doubled in just the past 5 years, with the price continuing to go up every year about 1 or 2%. And clam production has been pretty flat. Price collapsed around 9/11, and it's come back a little bit, around 14 cents by the latest count in Virginia, which is the gorilla in the room. You can see the production coming out of Virginia is really dominating all the other states. Some of the new species that we're seeing a little bit of interest in, mussels in the far north New England. Leslie's trying to get the Sunray Venus, and I have tasted that product. That is an amazing product. I hope you guys get that going, because I want to buy some. We've got some guys playing around with growing soft shell clams. It's a challenge because it's not very expensive to sell, so it's tough to make money on. And a juvenile surf clam is something that people are experimenting with. Sea scallops up in New England, and I've played around with the bay scallop, and if I could figure out how to be making money, I'd still be doing that. But each one of these has challenges, and we're trying to figure it out. One thing that we're starting to get a handle on is oyster production. And now that we're getting, this is what happened in Rhode Island after we fixed the regulations back in 2001. It really didn't take us long to get started. We got $5 million being grown on 200 acres, employing about 200 people. Similar thing is going on in Virginia. Once they figured out that they could grow disease-resistant oysters, because we've got Dermo and MSX were killing most of the oysters before they would reach market size in the Chesapeake Bay. And once they got some lines developed that had been selectively bred for disease resistance, and then they figured out how to do the triploidy on a regular basis, that meant they could get the oysters to market size in under really a year and a half, and get them there before they died to disease. And that was really all it took. These guys had big farms already. They were already growing $40 million worth of clams. They had big investments. They had deep pockets. They had a lot of grounds. And now they're just going to town on the oyster. And the triploidy, I don't know, how many people here know about triploidy? Okay, so most of you know what a triploid oyster is. It's sort of like a seedless watermelon. It doesn't devote any energy to spawning, and it's a nice quality oyster year-round, as opposed to being all spawned out, and I call it snot on a shell, which is difficult to market that in the middle of summer. And of course, you guys have a summer that lasts for 9 months, so that's something you're probably going to want to be using is the triploid, and I highly recommend it. It seems to be more efficient in converting energy resources whenever the food is rich. It seems to be a little bit less happy than a normal diploid oyster when the food is poor. So if you're in an area where the food is not good, or if you're not very good at cleaning your cages and they're not getting enough flow, then you might find that the triploid oyster is not for you, because it will suffer disproportionately. But you can see that these guys are doing well in Virginia, and we're seeing this up and down the coast. The only reason I give you the Rhode Island numbers and the Virginia numbers is because those are the only 2 states that really do a good job reporting. So I really don't know what's going on in the other states. I could lie about it and pretend I do, but I really don't. So Moonstone, well, this is a brand that I pulled together when I started 27, 30 years ago growing oysters. And I named it after a nude beach in Rhode Island. If you're not from Rhode Island, it doesn't make any sense to you, but it still is a good name. People seem to identify with clean water and gemstones, and I'll talk a little bit about naming your brand a little later. But one thing is that I have found out is that once you get an established brand, it adds about 8% to the value of the product. And I know this because I got a guy growing oysters right next to me, and his oysters are just as good as mine, and he's using the same techniques as I am, and the oysters come out looking just the same. But because they don't have the name, he was not able to command my price. It took him 3 or 4 years before he was able to command that price. And I'm going to talk about why that happens and the whole idea of branding. And a lot of you guys are probably not going to want to do that. But some of you are going to find that this is the way that's going to justify all the hard work that's involved in growing your product, because it gets you a fair amount of money. And so what is it about the brand? Well, it's a passion for quality. I was obsessed with quality. I was very persistent. I chose a good name, and oh yeah, did I mention quality? This is really the barrier for entry, is maintaining your quality and not letting anything go out under your name that doesn't have top quality. And oysters are squirrely, and some of them are going to be ugly, and you're not going to want to throw them away. So create another brand and sell them to Joe's Clam Shack as your cheap line, because some of them are not going to be suitable for the 4-star restaurants. It's just the way oysters are. They aren't all uniform. So the difference between selling and marketing. So a typical fisherman is used to being the price taker. In other words, he goes he brings his crop in, his landings in to the buyer and says, what are you paying? And that's not where you want to be. You want to be the price maker. The price maker is, I go to the restaurant and I say, this is my product. It's beautiful, it's consistent. I have all of these attributes that you're going to love it. I can get it there year round. I really care about this product. I'll never get you sick. And this is my price. And I determine the price, and if it's too high for you, then you're probably not my kind of customer. And for me, it was the difference between success and failure. And I'm going to go into it, but just a little bit about branding first, and go through marketing 101 a little bit here. But the product, you've got a product, and you can market your product, and what are your attributes, and why is your product so great. You can market your brand, and that attached to a brand is the name, the image, the service, the logo, the reputation that you've built up over time, your consistency, and whether you're a good salesman. And then there's the whole category. And this is what I do through the association, is I market the whole category of farm-raised oysters. They're, heart healthy and good for the environment. Did I mention they're good for the environment? They're sustainable, they're high in minerals, they're local, they're fresh, all that good stuff. And so, what is a brand? Well, as I said, it's associated with a product or a service. It's reinforced by a logo. And I got every piece of clothing I own has got my logo on it. And some of my members in my association want to get me fired because I still wear all these clothes, but I'm not going to throw them out. But I had somebody on the plane ask me today, what about that logo? And it turned out that she actually had something to do with oysters, and she wanted to know my business card. And so I wasn't even trying to make a sale. I've sold my company 7 years ago. But if you're always marketing, it happens. It can take years to establish, and it's not built overnight, but you can destroy it like that. You can destroy your brand by putting out bad product, by having it mishandled, by getting somebody sick. Any of those things can be devastating to a brand. A word about competition, and this is really important. Once you guys start to get a few growers and you're all pumping out product, chances are there's probably only a few 4-star restaurants within a 100-mile radius, and if you all start to try and sell there, and you say, well, Joe's selling there, but I'll come in a nickel lower. And then Pete comes in and says, well, I'll undercut Joe by a nickel, and it's a race to the bottom. So this happened out in Wellfleet, and I watched it happen, and suddenly they had a beautiful product that was going for 30 cents. And I'm like, really? Because I'm only, 2 hours away, and I'm getting 60. And this is what local competition can do to your price. So Don't compete on price alone unless you can be the low-cost producer. If you can be the Walmart of oyster producers and your costs are so low that you can drive everybody else out, then talk about competing on price. But until then, my advice to you is find another feature that sets your product apart from your competition. You don't want to be Walmart. You want to be somebody special, somebody who's getting a very high price for your product. You work too hard to get chump change. So how are you going to set yourself apart? Well, you know, service, that's one way. I would deliver, you know, to my restaurants up in Providence twice a week. If I saw a bag of my oysters that was sitting on their shelf from a week ago, I'd offer to take it back and give them a refund. Because I didn't want them to be serving 2-week-old moonstones under my name and my trademark. That's not good for me. Salesmanship. Are you passionate? Damn right, I am passionate. Can you be convincing and passionate? Persistent? I think you might be able to. But, you know, not everybody's going to be able to. And frankly, my partner, he's one of these antisocial people who should never be talking to customers. Never. Just, I mean, and there are people like that. There are people like me who try and do it all, and I can be out there on the water, and then I'll go up and do the sales calls and burn myself out. But you can, you know, to me, it was a natural. It's not for everybody. But so how can you set yourself apart? How can you make your product unique from all the other growers that are going to be making oysters out of this area? So what does the consumer want? And these are all the various attributes that a typical restaurant is going to be looking for. And I say restaurant because 95% of oysters are sold in restaurants. Americans can't open oysters. Most of them are not sold in supermarkets or seafood stores. The number of people who can actually get them open is pretty small. So the vast majority of oysters are sold in restaurants. That's going to be your main customer. Is, believe it or not, it's not the end customer, the guy who walks into the restaurant. If you can't sell to the buyer for the restaurant or the owner of that restaurant or the chef of that restaurant, the customer will never see your product. Your target is the buyer of the restaurant, or hopefully a restaurant chain. That's ideal. If you got somebody who's got 5 restaurants, then you can sell one guy and you're into 5 restaurants. But more often you're talking to a chef and you're trying to get in the door and you're telling them that you've got top quality, consistent product, you're clean, the shape is uniform, it's always going to be the same size, the flavor is unbelievable, you got a catchy name that people are going to remember, I can get it to you year-round. And I'm going to get it there fresh, and it's going to have a short date on the package. And the packaging is attractive. I mean, we're not turning onion sacks inside out and say, here, you know, that's for sellers. We're marketers. We've got nice, clean, attractive packaging. We've got food safety and sustainability and you know, low prices on the last one I care about. So the joke here is the race for quality has no finish line, so technically it's more like a death march. And you know, okay, haha. But yes, no, you can always do better, and quality is really the most important prerequisite to get into this game. So it's the baseline. You got to set your standards high. You got to keep them high. You got to know what your staff is doing. If you've got, you know, I was a small company. I had 3 guys working for me year-round. But you know, I still had to watch them because they wouldn't have the same standards that I had. And I'd come in and smell the shop, and if the shop stank, that wasn't good enough for me. And you know, they got it. Eventually they were all on board. Perform regular quality control, and then when you go in and you talk to your chefs, and this, you know, I would always do the deliveries for years, driving into the restaurant, hey, Moonstone Bob, how you doing? This is how they talk in Rhode Island. And they loved me because I had the best oysters around, and they would give me a big pat on the back, and that was what made this job worthwhile, because you're working so hard out on the water, it's brutal, especially in winter. Oh, you guys don't have winter, so I'll tell you, busting 7 inches of ice to get the oysters out, it's a chore. But it made it worthwhile. But occasionally you'd get a feedback, and oh, you got a problem. I had 5 dead in the box. Oh, that's terrible. You could find out. If I'm selling to a wholesaler, I never get that feedback. I never hear. The chef will complain to the wholesaler. The wholesaler might tell me 3 weeks later, oh yeah, I had some guys complaining about some dead, some chips, I probably don't get that. But I love the fact that I can talk to a chef and get that instant feedback. If I've got a problem, I know about it immediately. I can fix it by the next week. You want to pack the boxes if every oyster on that box has your name on it, because your reputation is riding on every single oyster. As I said before, you want to sell the ugly ones under a different name. Sometimes you'll get one where the swoop is on the other direction. It's almost impossible to open it. If you do open it, it's going to slide off the shell. Don't put that in the box. It's, you're saying, oh, that's another 45 cents, another 60 cents. I want it sold. No. You're killing your own trademark. Don't do that. And if they do spawn, if you're not using triploids and they do spawn, or if for some other reason the food quality is low and the quality is off, stop shipping, and the customers are going to scream bloody murder, but then you're going to say, look, the quality's off, you don't want this. And then they'll realize that you're looking out for them, and they're going to say, oh, that's great, you're looking out for me, I appreciate that. Consistency. So chefs want a predictable size, and oysters are not uniform typically. I mean, if they're growing really wonderfully, you'll get a whole batch of oysters that are all hitting the same size, and they all look, and that's a wonderful thing when it happens. More often, you got ones that are in the side of the bag and they're not getting fed, and they take another couple months to come to size, and so you got a mix of large and small ones. There's incredible variation in oysters, and so we would sell different size grades. We had a large, a medium, a small, a petite, a fancy, a special. Well, make the customer feel special. Oh, you want this? Absolutely. I had a customer, Le Bernardin, in Manhattan. Very picky French chef. He wanted his oysters between 2 3/4 and 3 inches. And they all had to be shaped like a walnut. And I would pick through 3,000 oysters to get a couple boxes of Le Burns, we call them. So we would set aside Le Burns and stockpile them, and every week he would get his perfect oysters. But this was like one of the most famous restaurants in Manhattan. He got written up as the top restaurant. I want to be on his menu because other chefs go there and they look, hey, moonstones? Wow, where can I get moonstones? And suddenly they're calling you up out of the blue, and you've got a customer that you didn't even try and market. And so that is, that's great. So you want to have, large, small, medium, find out what your customer wants. Interestingly, when I started this, long ago, 30 years ago, if I tried to sell something smaller than 4.5 inches in Boston, they would have laughed me out of the market. We have seen a dramatic change in the market for oysters in my experience, and now there's this market for petites. These tiny little crazy things, slightly larger than a mussel, and it's getting the same amount of money as something that took me a whole nother year to grow, and it's a wonderful thing. If you can sell them before they die, that's money in the bank. Oysters die. This is another fact of growing oysters. They die, and it's unfortunate. But so, there is a market now for petites. I like to joke that there's essentially 2 kinds of markets for oysters. There's the old, cheap white guys like me who want to get a nice big oyster so you're getting your money's worth. And then there's these, you spend 10 minutes in Grand Central Station Raw Bar in Manhattan, and you'll see some very nicely dressed woman walk in and say words that I never thought I would hear anybody say. What's the smallest oyster you have? Really? I mean, and so that's fine. We can give you whatever you want, but we need to know what you want, and then we will supply that product. And if you want a 2 or 3 inch oyster, I can do that. I can do that in half the time it takes me to do a 4-inch oyster. So I will still make money, and you'll still be satisfying your customer, and that's wonderful. So, cull, sort, sell multiple size grades, ask your customers what they want and give it to them. It's really not rocket science. Shape. So, you know, everybody wants a nice deep cup in a uniform shape. And as I said, you don't want to try and slip in a few of the snaggly ones. It just kills your trademark. You invested too much time and energy building your trademark. You don't want it. All that stuff goes to Joe's Clam Shack or your oyster roast or some other customer, not shipped out on your trademark. I had, you know, I had the Moonstone trademark and I had the Narragansett Bay Specials, which was anything but special. They were especially ugly. I mean, they tasted the same. It's grown in the same water. They just didn't have the great shape. So cleanliness. So you can do this quickly. Each of those bags has 100 oysters, market-sized oysters, all counted out. Blast all the muck off them. This is the law, for one thing. But, you know, this is food. It's going in someone's mouth. You don't want it to have mud and seaweed and gunk growing on it. And besides, if you leave it in a box for a week, it starts to stink. So get that gunk off there. You can do this quickly, easily, cheaply. Take my advice and wear earplugs, because I can't hear anymore. I've spent too many years using a 5-horsepower Briggs & Stratton. It's really, really cheap, and it adds, I believe it adds value. You don't want to have to give the box to the chef and then him designate some poor schmuck to go wash them all before he can serve them. I hate it when I'm shucking in the raw bar and I'm finding my glove is all muddy, and you know, because the guy didn't wash the bag. I mean, how hard is that? It's, you know, I got to wash my hand between every oyster. This is food. You're putting it in your mouth raw. You need to clean it. And as I said, it's federal law. Food safety. Well, this has been a real eye-opener for us in the Northeast. We've had a few illnesses from Vibrio parahemolyticus. I was always a real prick, as I mentioned earlier, about ice, and we would stockpile all our oysters in the water, and just before the end of the day, we'll pull them all, put them on deck, quickly pressure wash them, and run into the cooler. And I could get 10,000 pieces in under an hour, and they're in the walk-in. It's a beautiful thing. And really, that's what you need to be able to do. And if you can't do that, you're going to be running into a problem. If you look at this harvest brochure, one of the things that we are faced with is two very challenging naturally occurring bacteria called Vibrio. And there's a little table here. We've done a diagram to try and illustrate what happens at different temperatures. And basically, this bacteria loves warm water. As soon as it comes out of the water, your oyster, the bacteria start to grow. And the rate at which they grow is determined by the temperature at which they're being held. And at 90 degrees, they will double in as short as 15 minutes. So you can come out of the water with a perfectly safe oyster, and 15 minutes later, it's got twice as many bacteria. And 15 minutes later, it's got 4 times as many bacteria. So 45 minutes later, it's got 8 times as many bacteria. And an hour later, you're up there at 16 times the amount that you started with. And you haven't even got to the refrigerator yet. So this is taking a perfectly good oyster and turning it into something that could put somebody in the hospital and trash your perfectly good trademark. So the cool thing is, and it was an unintentional pun there, the cool thing is that below 60 degrees, at 60 degrees, it takes 132 hours for those bacteria to double. So essentially 3 days. If you can get your oysters down to 60 degrees, you really don't have to worry about this bacteria growing anymore. So that's really nice. And you're probably going to have rules, I believe I heard 55 degrees in 1 hour. And this is basically just to control the growth of bacteria. And trust me, you don't want to get people sick. It trashes the market. It trashes your trademark. It closes, often will result in closures of your growing grounds, so you can't sell. But the damage to the markets is really what is bad. And frankly, the customer is not too savvy. We'll have a Vibrio vulnificus illness in Louisiana, and the price of lobster in Maine drops. I kid you not. They hear about an illness and they just get away from seafood altogether. So this is good for all of us. And it's not only important that you do a good job, but you have to ride herd on your neighbors as well. And I know this is really a tough message for fishermen. I've been a fisherman, and everybody says, I'm not going to tell on my neighbor. I have to work with him. He's going to come back and key my car. You are all in the same boat here. When he gets somebody sick, they close your growing area. When he gets somebody sick, chances are they're going to pin it on you because they didn't do the traceback right. When he gets somebody sick, the whole industry is going to take a big hiccup. The price is going to drop. The demand is going to drop. So you have to watch your neighbor just as much as you have to watch your crew. And it's going to be a hard conversation, but you need to convince them to do the right thing and get it cold quickly. And I can't emphasize this enough. If that doesn't work, it's time to call, it's time to drop a dime and get the enforcement people there. I've got enforcement on speed dial, and I'm not shy. I drop a dime all the time. And I've had my truck keyed, but this is public health. This is the right thing to do. And the costs of not complying, we had this happen in Massachusetts. We had 12 illnesses in 2012, and everybody said, look, this has never happened before, and the compliance of the new regulations that come down are what really killed. So they went from 5 hours to 2 hours to refrigeration, and everybody screamed bloody murder, I can't do this, I can't do this. And quite frankly, a lot of people didn't do it, and they had 24 illnesses the next year, and a lot more closures. And guess what? A whole snowstorm of harder regulations that made it even harder now, 1 hour to refrigeration. So if you don't comply and you start getting illnesses, it's not only bad for business, it's going to be bad for the regulatory snowstorm. I would use another word, but I'm being taped here, that is likely to be coming your way once you get a few illnesses. And if you invest this much money in your company and in growing oysters and in developing a trademark, you really can't risk it on getting somebody sick. So do the right thing, get them cold as fast as possible. We've been doing ice slurry dips in certain growing areas in New England. You can get them down to 37 degrees in 7 minutes flat. You take them out of the ice slurry dip, you put it in the cooler, it's good to go. It doesn't really warm up that fast. A handful of ice will keep them cold. Getting them cold, either you can pack them loose in loose ice, about 2 parts oysters to 1 part ice, and they will drop at the same rate. So in under 10 minutes, you've got a nice cold product, 0 bacterial growth. This is the best you can hope for. At very least, keep them in the shade. 90 degrees is awful. 80 degrees is not good. 70 degrees is okay. 60 is, we're getting there, but anything better than that is really where you want to be. And if you need help, I'm sure that your extension agents, your health people will be able to put a little temperature recorder inside an oyster, and you can see how your process is working, and it really helps you understand where your problems are. We had a guy who got them all figured out, and he was doing the right thing, and then he was putting the pallet on 90-degree pavement and then stacking the bags on the pallet, and it took him about 10-15 minutes, and that bottom bag was all the way up to 80 by the time he had got the pallet truck in there. And so, okay, this will help you identify the flaws in your process. This is, again, it's not rocket science, it's just simple science. All right, I think I beat that to death. Any questions about this? Yeah?
When you're grading oysters and you pull them out, how important, and then you put them back in, does the bacteria dissipate?
So all the evidence is, and this is a big question in New England, the resubmergence issue is quite complicated. If you, So the evidence is that within a tide, they will come back to a normal level, even if they've been exposed for, if they're intertidally grown. I mean, think about it. In Wellfleet, we've got oysters that are exposed twice a day for several hours, and they warm right up to 90. And so the level of bacteria in those oysters climbs right up, and then the tide comes in, and within a few hours, they're back to normal. Jessica Jones of the FDA right here in the Dauphin Island lab showed that they did this on the West Coast in Washington. Intertidal oysters, they pick them up into a giant crate, tide comes in. As long as they got 4 hours of submergence, then they crane that up onto a boat and run in and put it in the cooler, and they're good to go. So the evidence is that they come back within a tide, back into equilibrium if they've had a chance to open up and start filtering again. If you refrigerate them and then put them back in the water, that really makes them unhappy. You will probably get some mortality. This was done, they wanted to see whether you could take Gulf Coast oysters from Louisiana that were pink tagged. In other words, they were not harvested within 1 hour to ice. And could we put them back in the water, and how long would it take for them to become safe for raw consumption? So they did the study. They left them out on, well, to do the study, you actually have to get the bacteria levels very high to show that you can bring them down. That's how the FDA determines if you've got a process that is actually working. So in order to get the elevated levels, they left them out on deck for most of the day, and sure, the bacteria multiplied, so they had really high levels. Then they put them in a refrigerated truck and drove them to Dauphin Island, and then they put them back in 80-degree water. So those animals were really stressed. In fact, 30% of them died. And yes, it took almost a week for those numbers to come back to baseline. But these animals were dead, or 30% of them were. So yes, if you stress them out that much, if you're using an oyster grow cage and you're putting them up in the sun for a day, you probably want to give them a week or two before you harvest that. I would not sell that the next day, because unless you've got solid science data that shows that they're coming back down, give yourself a margin of error. If they've been exposed to some really hard stress, if you've been banging them around, knocking off barnacles or something like that, I'd give them a while, because these are animals. They're not eggs. I mean, they're eggs. They're more closer to eggs than rocks. I always tell my guys when they're slamming the bags around, they're not rocks.
You're better to grade them on a boat than to take them to the facility and do it, aren't you?
If you're putting them back in the water, so the guys in Duxbury have built all these houseboats so they can be out there in the shade to do their grading, and then they'll hang them under the boat and then at the end of the day, they'll bring them all in. But those oysters have only been out of the water for an hour, so it's really not a big deal. And then they've got additional time to come back to background by hanging them under the boat. But there was a lot of angst based on this study that I just mentioned, where these oysters that were, tortured and then put back in the water, and took several weeks to come back. I think it was at least a week, might have been 2, but was it 2 weeks to come back to baseline? So, I don't really view that as a valid study, because no one would do that to an oyster and expect it to be servable. At least nothing I would do to my oysters is anywhere close to that. But the oyster grow situation, where you're leaving them up in the sun for 24, or I don't know how long you're leaving them up down here. You probably only need a few hours. But up where we are, we have to leave them out for a day and a half sometimes. In either case, I advise, give them a couple weeks. You also want to let that stuff that's died get eaten by the crabs and nibbled off. You don't want to have dead gunk on your oyster. So it makes sense. And most guys are seeing that works really well. But if it's just a few hours of exposure, they're gonna come back to background within a tide. All the evidence is pointing that way. Jessica Jones in Dauphin Island has got several studies that show that that's going to be adequate. But your state is going to have its own regulations, and I'm anxious to hear what you've developed. So where am I here? Any other questions on Vibrios before I go on? All right. Freshness, get it to the market as fast as possible. The restaurants always want to see the, as short a date as possible. Typically, you will have a regulation where you have to get it down to 50 degrees before you can ship it, and that's probably prudent. Sometimes that means overnight in the reefer, but if you're using slurry dip, you can get it down to below 50 in 7 minutes. So. But we can always order, leave stuff stockpiled in the water and harvest what we have orders for that day. I don't keep a stockpile of stuff in the walk-in. I don't want to have 2-day-old product. I definitely don't want to have 3-day-old product. So I'm leaving stuff inventoried in 100-count bags out in the water where I can grab it quickly. And I don't want my customers to be holding inventory either. So if you have a chance to deliver twice a week, that's great. Flavor. So you really don't have much of a control over the flavor. Your oysters are going to taste like the water they're grown in. But what you can do is you can celebrate that difference. Just like I can taste the slight difference between the guy growing right next to me. And I've been tasting them a long time, so I'm pretty good at that. But you can market that uniqueness. And what I love to do is get a couple wine snobs together and serve them oysters, and then ask them to come up with flowery adjectives. They're much better. I had an oyster tasting event through the association, and I asked everybody to describe their oysters, and everybody said, oh, they're sweet and salty, they're briny, and okay, can you give me something else? And the wine snobs are really good at this. Oh, it's got intelligence. What? Okay, but they will help you develop the right terms to market your product. It tastes like watermelon. I don't know. I've never really tasted that in an oyster, but there's a lot of people that use that. It's really great to have the flowery language, and I'm not great at it, but there are people who make a living at this stuff, and it's, if you offer to give them free oysters, they'll help you out. Year-round availability. Now this is great. If you can modulate your harvest and your supply to meet demand, one of the great things is you can get your name on the menu. Nowadays, less so. A lot of restaurants are printing up a different menu every day. But once you can get on the menu, that means they basically have to serve your product unless they want to commit fraud, which is not unusual, but that's another story. When you do shut off a customer, he's going to have to replace you, and then you're going to have to win him back, which means you're going to have to either drop your price or convince him that you're better or something else. And as I mentioned earlier, the triploids are a great way to avoid that summer off-quality issue of having snot on a shell, which is not something that you want to do. So modulating that year-round availability it's a challenge. Knowing how many oysters that you have at any given time can be a challenge because they're always dying. But one of the things that I say, you don't have a situation where your oysters stop growing. Am I right? Your water temperature never drops below 50. They grow year-round. Up in New England, when the water temperature drops below 50, around November 15th, the digestive enzymes of an oyster no longer function. It doesn't feed, it doesn't grow until around May 15th. So it has to make it from November till May. And that means I have to monitor my inventory and make it through the year. Typically what we see is this time of year, in this late spring, most of the growers, whether you're from Virginia, they have a few extra months of growth, but we find that you've picked through the crop 3 times, and each time the crop got smaller and smaller and smaller. There hasn't been any growth. So you're running out of product come May, and the market is going nuts. Everybody is asking for product. Last year at this time, there was a nationwide shortage of oysters in April, and the price popped like 15%. I swear to God. And I've not seeing it quite as bad this year, but there is this seasonal availability, supply and demand issue. So I always say that if you've got oysters still of market size and they're really starting to grow again around June, then your price is probably too high. But if you ran out of oysters in February, you left money on the table. It was time to raise your prices. And this is the time of year when you can raise your prices because demand is high and they'll argue less. This is the time when I say you can put rocks in a box because they'll buy anything because they're desperate for oysters. And, but most of the year, especially in the fall, you've had great growth through the summer, through the fall, and you've got 4 different sizes. You can sell large ones, small ones, and the market tanks. People stop going to restaurant in the fall. I don't know what it is. I hear it in the seafood industry. Like people are selling tuna, sword. They stop going to the restaurants in the fall. And I've got the best tasting, best looking oysters, and they're just, you know, I've got more than I know what to do with, and I can't sell them. And I've tried lowering the price, doesn't help. The market is just soft. And then usually around, you get a little pop at Thanksgiving, a little pop at Christmas, and a little pop at Valentine's Day, and then Lent happens, and suddenly the market triples. And from Lent until, well, nowadays we're seeing it's pretty much straight through the summer, but the markets are really, really strong in the spring and through the summer. So, you know, if you are finding that you're running out of product before June, you've underpriced your product. That tells you you've got some room to go up. That's all I'm saying. Knowing how to price your product is very, very challenging. And you know, I just say you got to find that happy medium. When you get stuck with a lot of product, you're too high. But don't feel like you have to, just because you got a lot of market-sized product in the fall, that you need to lower your prices. If you can wait till the spring, there's even a market for jumbos. You can get, you know, I had 100-pound 100 counts. I lost a bunch of oysters. I found them, and they were very large. And I was getting 75 cents a piece for 100-pound 100 counts. I mean, you have to get a knife and fork out, but there's always a bunch of like rich, cheap, not rich, old cheap guys like me who want to get their money's worth, and they're going to pay 75 cents for something if they have to get a knife and fork out. All right. Packaging. So as I said, this is really important. You can, these boxes are pretty cheap. You can have your logo printed on them. Onion sacks are for sellers, not for marketers, and this is a great opportunity to tell your customer why they're paying so much for your product. It's, the box art is a great place to say we're sustainable, we're lovely, we got the best flavor, my dog wears a tutu. I don't know, whatever you think is important. Nowadays they want to hear the story. They want to know about your family. They want to know where they're grown. The more you can tell them about the product and where it came from, the more value you add to that product. It's true for antiques. It's true for oysters. It's true for wines. The more you can tell them about where that product came from, the more price they're willing to pay. And here's a great tip. You can get waterproof paper from Forestry Supply and put a flyer inside every single box. It's like being able to go give waitstaff training at every restaurant you sell to. They'll take it out of the box, they'll put it on the cork board, and anytime a customer has a question about Moonstones or your product, they'll go and they'll consult the list, and then you can get your information out. It's grown in this pond, and we use this techniques, and we're off bottom, and we use this kind of care, and this kind of this is a wonderful thing. If you use regular paper, by the time they open the box, it'll be damp toilet paper and they'll throw it out. But if you use waterproof paper, it'll last for months. And just, it costs pennies. It's a great tool. Entering a new market. So this is Grand Central Station. So I didn't have a lot of experience when I went to go market my first oyster, and I was pretty naive. I went into Zaggett's. Zaggett's is now bought by Google, and you go online, do a search on raw bars in Manhattan, and you get 900 hits, which is kind of staggering. To find where you want to go, and how you're going to, parts of that is going to be determined by how you're going to get them there. Is there a refrigerated truck that'll get your product there quickly and cheaply? Or you're driving them yourselves. But you know, go get the 3 or 5 top name restaurants that have oysters on their menu and bring in your cooler of oysters, and you just do your best pitch. And you hope that you walk out of there with 1 or 2 sales and get your product on the menu. And then hopefully those chefs talk to other chefs, because chefs love to talk to other chefs, and suddenly you're getting calls. And this worked for me in Chicago and Detroit and Boston and DC. So you go and you make your sales pitch and get on the menu, and it works. It's work, it's expensive, and you got to have the passion and everything else, but it's how you do it. So a few words about selling direct versus selling wholesale. If you want to embark on the task of selling them direct to a restaurant, you're going to have to get a dealer's permit. You're going to have a HACCP plan, a hazard analysis and critical control point plan, which is 2 or 3 days of training. You're going to have a facility with stainless steel 3-bay sinks and lots of record keeping. You're going to probably need a delivery truck with a reefer unit. There's a lot of expenses, overhead, and extra work. You're going to need to make weekly calls to all your customers and set this up. Lots of driving. Money collection. These guys are pricks. They don't pay. And they go out of business at the drop of a hat. So don't, 30 days out, if you're not paying and you owe me money for 4 weeks of oysters, I'm sorry, I can't deliver till I see that check, because when they go out of business and they owe you $3,000, you're never seeing that money. It's happened. And if they really want your product, they're going to pay. And that's just got to be that way. I cannot emphasize this enough. What I never expected getting into this was that you're going to spend almost a half a day a week on the phone chasing money. It shouldn't be that way. I pay my bills on time, but they somehow think I'm supposed to be their credit line. I'm not willing to do that anymore. The thing is that if you're selling to a wholesaler and at some level of production, you're going to have to go to a wholesaler, because it's just impossible. It's a lot easier to sell 10 boxes to 10 wholesalers rather than 1 box to 100 restaurants, because that's 100 calls and chasing checks will be your entire life. But the wholesaler, he's going to have a price sheet, and he's going to say, I got Moonstones for this price, I got Joe's Oysters for this price, I got blah, 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 blah. And that's how he's selling your product. He doesn't have your passion. He doesn't care. As long as he gets a sale, he gets $5 off of Joe's box, he gets $5 off of your box. He doesn't care whether he sells Joe's or you. There's no skin off his back. So he's not going to be passionate. He's going to have a price sheet, and so what I like to do is I would talk to my wholesalers and say, look, I want to come into Baltimore. I want to talk to your 3 best oyster customers. I'm going to go upsell them on my product, and I'm not going to steal your customer. I'm not going to backdoor the wholesaler and sell around you, because that's a great way to lose a wholesaler. They will hate you. But if you offer to go upsell for them, do their marketing for them, bring your passion direct to the chef, go and tell that guy about your dog and your all the things that make this, then he will make the call to your wholesaler and ask for your product. Your wholesaler will make more money, and you'll be making more money. It's hard. Most wholesalers are going to be very reluctant to tell you who their best customers are. But if you can get that relationship and go do that, and even go in with your wholesaler to visit the chefs, it is a way to get more product out the door. And then another thing is you can ask for a recommendation from a good chef. If you've got a chef and a good relationship and you've been selling with somebody, you can say, hey, are there any other oyster bars that you think I should be talking to? Anybody who does as good a job as you do, chef? Butter them up, and then maybe he'll give you a, hey, try selling to Tommy down the street. As I mentioned, that above a certain volume of production, direct sales are going to be challenging. And if you're competing with wholesalers and you're selling into two levels of the marketplace, I learned this the hard way. You have to have a different price for your wholesaler than your retailer. If you don't, and the wholesaler finds out that you're selling to him the same price you're selling to his customer, then you probably have lost your wholesaler. And frankly, wholesalers are important. I was basically unable to sell an oyster in Philadelphia for about 5 years because I didn't know that rule. So they call them the seafood mafia for a reason. You need to give your wholesaler a margin, and if you're going to sell into two levels of the market, otherwise somebody's going to get really pissed off. And just because you're selling to a wholesaler doesn't mean you can stop marketing. As I said, work with your wholesaler, keep marketing, go help them sell your product, because they aren't going to do it for you. They don't care. So what's in a name? Well, good marketing and a consistent product can sell any name. You've all probably heard of Hog Island oysters. I don't know why anybody would want to eat something from Hog Island, but they do a great job. They sell a lot of product, and they've got because they've got a consistent product and they do a great job marketing. So you know, any name can sell an oyster. But I do think that there are a few good names, and there are a few bad names, which I almost got firing for mentioning a few bad names earlier. So I won't mention anybody, but you know, if you're naming yourself after a sewage treatment plant or you know, a harbor or you know, something like that, probably not great. Sell the story. They love the story. They want to hear about your quaint village. They want to hear about that faraway cove, that rugged individual who's out there working his butt off and how hard it is. They want to know how you've trained sea lions to harvest oysters in your spare time. They want, you know, they want to make it real. So sell the sex. I got a little trouble for showing this slide as well, but this works. Oysters have a sexy reputation. I named my oyster after a nude beach. It works. People expect, and you know, it may be an aphrodisiac. I keep thinking we need more studies. We know that shellfish culture is one of the most sustainable forms of protein production on the planet. We've gotten the gold star from the folks at Seafood Watch, who tell you which species are politically correct to eat. Cultured clams and cultured oysters. We not only have very low impact, but we have ecosystem benefits as well. We clean the water, we provide habitat for little critters. There's a mountain of literature on our website that talks about why shellfish farming is green and why it's good for the environment. And you can market that. It's great. This is one place where you can have your seafood and eat it too. Certification. So I've worked a long time with World Wrestling Federation, whatever it is, developing the standards for sustainability certification. And I don't have a lot of belief or patience in this. I think that the costs that they demand for having your product to be certified and audited are going to be too high, and you're not likely to recover those expenses in terms of what your customer is willing to pay. Only a tiny fraction, something like 3% of Americans even know what sustainable seafood is. And so I don't think there's a market advantage. I think that there's other terms that are just as good. This is being driven by the large buyers, the large buyers are being blackmailed by the environmental groups into saying you must demand sustainable certified seafood. So I don't think it's really worth our while to go there unless your restaurant is demanding that you get certified. But I do believe that there are other terms that you can use. Fresh, nutritious, safe. These are all good selling points. Until they harmonize the standards, there's going to be 3 or 4 groups out there that are willing to charge you thousands of dollars to certify your product. And you'll find that Whole Foods has got one certifier that they demand, and another group has got a different certification that they demand, and before you know it, you've got auditors wasting your entire day from multiple different groups. I'm hoping this doesn't catch any traction because I don't think that this is something that we can make money on. And one more thing about this, there is a question about who's going to defend the brand. In other words, when Greenpeace says that Marine Stewardship Council is not green enough, and they still go and boycott, does the Marine Stewardship Council stand up and say, yes, we are green, we're green enough? Because this does happen. And do they spend enough money that anybody actually hears them when they do the defending? Because just defending is not good enough. You actually have to get it out there in the press and spend some money. And I have not seen the certification companies doing this yet. So never stop marketing. You can put stuff on t-shirts and hats and bumper stickers and giveaways. Go to the trade shows and the sports events. Give talks, presentations at high schools, chefs teaching cooking schools. This is a great way. That's guerrilla marketing. Press releases, op-ed articles. If you Google guerrilla marketing, there's a whole bunch of stuff free on the web to tell you how to get your name brand out there free. Because let's face it, we don't want to spend a lot of money. Direct ad and print radio, who can afford that? Why would we do that? Your customer is a chef at a restaurant. It's not the general public. So if you can find a targeted way to get those chefs, that's where you want to spend your money and your time and your effort. It's really not cost effective, I don't believe, to do direct mail, print, advertising, and radio. But you can do a lot now. There's guys that are doing Facebook marketing, website marketing, training your staff to help out, site visits, farm tours, it's all good. If you can get your local paper to write a story about you, if you've got something cool happening, make something up. I discovered this cool new fish. It's amazing. It's only found. Come on down. And, if they write a story about you, you get your name in the paper. That's great. Get mentioned as by sponsoring a charity, a beach cleanup, something like that. Get your name in the paper. Submit an editorial. You're an expert on something. I guarantee it. It's just a way to get your name in the paper. Push the quirky story. So brand protection. I found this out the hard way. Check your customers. If they are not handling your product well, it reflects poorly on your brand. One of the fancy French restaurants in a town I should probably not name near me, I went there and they had an 8-foot walk-in. They had raw beef on a shelf over my raw oysters. That is against the law, but they also had onions and potatoes out under the porch next to the dumpster where the rats would find it. If you're going to do that with your food, somebody's going to get sick. And when somebody gets sick, they're going to blame it on the oyster. They always blame it on the oyster. Even if they ate all kinds of other stuff, they always blame it on the oyster. So, if you walk in and you're seeing signs that they're not handling their food properly, you probably don't want that customer. If they're not handling your food properly, if they're leaving that shellfish out, if you go to deliver it and they say, oh, just put the shellfish out there on the deck. No. Put it in the walk-in. Demand to put it in the walk-in. This is food. If they leave it out there for a couple hours, the bacteria are going to multiply and somebody's going to get sick. Get a trademark. Get a Google alert on that trademark. And so you will get an email anytime anybody in the press ever mentions that trademark, whether they're mentioning it, oh, I hated it, I had the worst experience ever, I got sick, or, oh man, this is awesome. You will read about it the next day, and it's great, it's free. I love free. Be alert for brand theft and fraud and trademark abuse. I had a customer who for 15 years was selling moonstones and had never bought a moonstone in his life. it's very hard to enforce it. You can get your lawyer to write him a nasty gram and say, stop. Turns out this guy was the mob, and he really didn't care about my lawyer, but I was upset. Very difficult, very challenging. You need to bring the lawsuit yourself and show damages. Well, in my case, I've been selling every oyster I've ever grown, so I couldn't say that I wasn't selling everything. And I'm just happy that whatever he was selling didn't get somebody sick, because it would have gone against my trademark. But I was very upset because I'm pretty sure it wasn't as good as a moonstone, whatever it was he was selling, because he was selling it for a lot less than I was. So what's the big picture? How big is our market? Well, we don't know. We do know that when you have an agricultural commodity, we've crashed the price on salmon, catfish, tilapia. We learned how to grow clams. We crashed the price on clams. Is this gravy train about to come to an abrupt halt? Well, I certainly hope not. I don't know how big the market is. One school of thought is that we are so far down from where we were 100 years ago, we're probably selling about 2% of what this country was eating 100 years ago. Maybe we've got that much further to grow. Maybe, like wines, we can continue to have a proliferation of names. We've already got about 500 name brand trademark oysters. I'm not seeing an end to this yet. I keep saying, I've been saying this for 10 years, that we run the risk of crashing the market. But I think if we keep the product quality up, we don't get people sick, maybe we've got a ways to go on this. I just heard that the price of oysters in Ireland collapsed. They overproduced. That was perhaps a warning sign. I don't think my industry is willing to accept a generic marketing campaign. Every time I've asked my membership whether they're willing to pitch in $2 cents for every bag of oysters they sell, they say, no, you're going to get fired. Oh, okay. But I think that what we do have is we have a vast market of oyster virgins, people who have never tried an oyster, and when they try their first fresh, beautiful, raw oyster, they're going to be going, oh, why did I wait so long? Those are the people we have to figure out how to get. All those people in Colorado who've never tried an oyster in their life, there's a lot of them. We can access that market if we are intelligent marketers. And as I said earlier, not everybody's cut out to be a salesperson. You know, you're not all going to be wanting to do all aspects of this. For those people, you know, I really advise you to work together. Set up a marketing cooperative and hire one good marketer. And all sell together, either with the same brand or with several different brands. I set up a marketing cooperative to take the product from 7 different farms, because all these kids who I taught how to grow in Rhode Island, they were all coming into my restaurants and they were coming under me for a nickel. And I was like, well, I could come back under you for a nickel, but suddenly we're racing to the bottom. So I said, how about if I buy all you can grow for a good price, and you'll never have to worry about marketing, collecting money, none of that. I'll take care of all that. And we set up a marketing cooperative. It's still going today. It's a beautiful thing. And Graham, who's been my marketing guy for 25 years, he's still running it. So, you know, cooperatives are challenging. They fail for a lot of reasons, usually because somebody says, I'm going to take my best product and I'm going to sell it to the co-op's best customer. And eventually enough of that happens and you've got the co-op is working with the worst product and the worst customers, and the co-op will fail when that happens. That's a recipe for failure that I've seen happen several times. So if you're going to set up a cooperative, make it expensive to leave. Or if somebody's selling around the back door, make it a very expensive experience for them. You don't want to let that happen, because your cooperative will fail. A few things about the association. I work on your behalf on national level in DC and in the ISSC, and I hope that you will all see some value in that. I'm an incredibly passionate advocate for shellfish farmers, and I think I do a pretty good job. So I guess I'll take questions if anybody has anything that I...
I know that Florida's Gulf Waters is having a problem getting their Army Corps of Engineer thing. Are you working on that?
Yes, the Army Corps. The Army Corps is a real challenge up and down in fact, nationwide. we're on the verge of holding hearings because each of the districts of the Army Corps is its own independent fiefdom. And that's really not the way federal policy is supposed to be handled. Senator Mikulski in Maryland has been very helpful. We've got a bunch of congressmen, especially some Republican congressmen in southern states, who are very interested in holding public hearings to address how the Army Corps is not able to be uniform in its various districts, and how there's duplicative authorities and duplicative regulations, concerns about eelgrass, and this is really should be NOAA habitat issues, but the Army Corps has developed their own. Yes, it is a huge problem. We have gone to the directorate in DC, and they seem somehow powerless to affect change in the districts. But as I say, we've got a bunch of people who are interested in holding hearings, and I'm hoping to go that way soon. I understand your problems, and I'd like to hear more about who I can talk to, because I understand that this is actually a NOAA habitat issue, and I do have some pull there. So I need to learn more about it. I learned about it on the ride down, but I'll be making some phone calls.
Thank you.
Bill, over here.
How much does it cost to get a patent, and how do you go about getting your name?
So there are things online, LegalZoom. You can do it reasonably cheaply, or you know, spend a couple $100 with hopefully an inexpensive lawyer to help you through it. It's not that hard. I did it myself online 20, 30 years ago, so it can't be that hard. Yeah.
You put a liner in your wax box, or do you just
No.
straight in there?
So when you're going on a refrigerated truck, you can just go in a cardboard box. Most of the refrigerated trucks that I've worked with, I can get my stuff to Chicago in 24 hours for $2.50 a box. If you want to go air freight, you got to have a liner, a 5 mil liner, foam, ice packs, and you're probably doubling the cost of your product to ship it anywhere, either ground or UPS.
You charge your customers for the shipping that goes.
Well, some customers yes, some customers no. You have to recover your costs either way. So either you're adding it to the price or you're charging them separately. Sometimes they resent being charged shipping and handling, in which case, fine, I'll give you one, it's flat price, but either way you're paying.
Anybody else? Let's take a 10-minute break.